I showed you at the top of the program how 17-year-old Will Shackel schooled the Climate and Energy Minister Chris Bowen on nuclear energy. I introduced you to the Brisbane school student back in January in one of his first bits of publicity, and he's had quite an impact since. Now, I started off today by telling him he took on a daunting challenge on Q&A, and he smashed it.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me on. It's a very daunting experience having to take the case for nuclear energy straight to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy himself on live TV, but I hope I did well in making the case for it to be legalised.
Well, what I loved about it was you cut through the political speak and cut to the chase. I'm going to show an example here. Here's a little bit of where the politicians are haggling over the cost. We know Chris Bowen's cost, the government's cost estimates for nuclear are ridiculous, but David Spears on the ABC tried to get a cost estimate from the opposition.
So what is the cost?
And here's the thing, David. We haven't announced our policy.
But you don't know the cost.
You'll be one of the first ones. You'll be one of the first ones today. However,
you've given us a very big range, though. Surely you must have an idea what the cost is if you're committing to this.
Yes, we do.
And
but
what is
I'm not going to preempt our policy.
It's a secret, is it?
And listening to all of that, we'll cut to the chase.
Will is itching to get in here. Sorry, guys. Will.
The cost, this is clearly getting us nowhere. The cost of nuclear is clearly highly contentious. And you know what the best way to find out the cost of nuclear energy is? It's to lift the nuclear energy ban, because at that point, you can actually see nuclear reactors, what they will cost, because at this stage, no company is able to propose for nuclear reactors to be built in this country.
Yeah, spot on, Will. And this is a point that came out at one stage. Chris Bowen said, I haven't got investors knocking down my door to propose nuclear energy plants. Well, why would they? Because it's illegal.
I think that's the thing. You can't understand the cost of nuclear energy until you lift the ban. And this is actually currently a reason the government is using to justify the ban being in place, which makes no sense to me. Because if it was about banning things because they're too expensive, solar panels back in the day would have been banned. Snowy hydro too would be banned. And also as well, Teslas would also be banned. So it just makes no sense to me. And this is actually something which came up in the government's own Senate report. So I think if the government wants to work out the economics of nuclear energy, the first thing they have to do is to lift the ban.
Interestingly, though, the government's only argument against nuclear now is the cost. To me, in a way, that's a victory for the nuclear debate, because they've stopped trying to scare people about nuclear weapons proliferation or about the waste issues or trying to claim it's unsafe. They're only arguing on cost, and that's a debate that the industry should win if it can.
Well, and I think the industry is able to win it when you look around the world in the global evidence. Like, what is it that Australia knows that countries around the world that are investing in nuclear energy, there's around 50 countries which are going to consider opening up a civil nuclear power reactor for the first time, and you can look around the world of countries increasing their investment in nuclear energy, whether that be in France, the UK, or in the United States. What is it that they know about the economics? It's most likely that they know a lot more about the economics of nuclear energy than we do in Australia. And the fact remains that nuclear energy is the cleanest form of energy. It has the lowest greenhouse gas emissions. It's the most reliable, and it's the second safest form of energy. So on those metrics alone, I think there's a really clear case for the ban on nuclear energy to be lifted in Australia.
Yeah, well, it's simply embarrassing to say that it doesn't stack up economically when you look at what's happening in the UK, France, South Korea, Finland, wherever else around the world. But I want to show another clip from Q&A, because here again, the politicians get hung up on the issue of waste. They can't come to a sensible conclusion. And once again, watch the way Will sticks into the conversation, cuts in with a cut-through point about waste.
he has given commitments to the United States and to the United Kingdom that we can effectively manage high-level nuclear waste. Here he is on national television saying that we can't. That is a serious concern.
Just because you can take...
Just very quickly, Will.
I very quickly have a word. I don't think the issue here is the science. The issue here is politics. I think that's really clear. We have the solutions of how to manage spent fuel, high-level waste around the world, and I think it's a shame we're still having these discussions and fear-mongering about high-level waste spent fuel, because I'm sure they wouldn't be having these discussions in France or in all of the other countries around the world which are able to successfully manage nuclear waste, and it's not an issue to them. But for some reason, it is here in Australia, and I think that says a lot about our politics today.
There you go, well said. But again, when it comes to the economic debate and the waste debate and any issue to do with nuclear, it is all about the politics, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately, and it seems that it's only that way in Australia of all countries, because when you look at around the world, nuclear energy is actually a uniting issue. If you look to the UK, both the Conservatives and UK Labor support it. In Finland, the Finnish Greens support it. But when you look back at Australia, for some reason, the government, even though it's not their own policy, still is willing to not lift the ban on nuclear energy, and that makes no sense to me. I think the thing about waste specifically is that it's important to remember that nuclear energy is the only form of energy which is able to manage its waste. When you look at the waste that comes from fossil fuels, we have to breathe it in every single day. That has consequences. The waste from renewables, whilst there's innovations in this space, which are great, that ends up in landfill. Nuclear energy is the only form of energy which is able to manage its waste.
So given this is such a big issue around the world, well, it's such a large industry around the world, but it's such a big political issue in Australia, why is it that a 17-year-old school student needs to form Nuclear for Australia and lead the debate, if you like, in this country? Why aren't politicians, engineers and scientists driving the debate?
Well, look, it's beyond me, and I think it's a real shame that I'm having to take out my own time to do this. But what I would say is I think the experts on this need to be listened to, because there are many experts, including in private circles, which are clear that nuclear energy is needed in Australia and that there are huge risks presented by the government's renewable-centric approach to the energy transition. And the fact is, if this net zero transformation fails, then it fails for my generation, and the consequences of that will be disastrous.
Well, congratulations on your advocacy, Will, and thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Chris.
Pretty impressive young bloke, isn't he? Will's got a petition up and running calling on the federal government to lift the ban on nuclear. You can scan this QR code on your screen, or you can go to nuclearforaustralia.com.